And hello, Twitch. It's Saturday. It's noon here in Central Standard Time, and that means we're going to be live in the studio doing some painting. So, I do have a number of miniatures on the screen there. You can see I am so backlogged right now. I am going to pop up a quick note here just so when we go to do any breaks or anything, I've got it prepped. And I've got most everything all set up, so we don't have to do a whole lot of setup. Now, all of these miniatures here, we're not going to be tackling all of them. There are a couple that I'm going to move aside. They still need a little bit of work. And we will just be moving those away a little bit. Some of them have been getting some green stuff, some cleanup. Some of them still need some green stuff and some cleanup. And this one here actually is one that I do want to work on a little bit, so I just want to give it a quick little brushing, make sure I've got all the debris off of it from all the cleanup we have been doing, because this one is a beautiful sculpt. It was a gift to me, and just a very cool miniature that I want to start painting. So the cleanup was an important aspect that I wanted to do before I started painting. And with a lot of these miniatures, you can see they are just raw miniatures right now. So we're going to be starting at the beginning. These are all plastics or resins, and as such have been washed and ready to go. The only thing they really need is their base coats popped on, and then they will be ready to be tackled layer by layer. So to start for the first aspects, we're going to be working from the inside out, basically. And that's my process. It always has been. Well, maybe not always has been isn't the right word, but has been for a very long time. Just getting my retinue of brushes out here so that I've got everything I need to be able to work on these minis. Now I've got a lot of skin tones here, and I don't think you'll be able to see them all, but it is a lot of paints here that we've got, and just because I want to have variations in the skin tones. The miniatures that we're going to be doing are going to be focused, so this figure here does not have any skin showing. This is for a diorama that I'm doing, so I'm going to move him to the side. We're going to focus primarily on these three for the skin tones. And again, I do want to have some variations in here. I have got my wet palette. It is mostly ready to go. Just waiting for some of this parchment paper to soak up from the sponges. I just want to review a little bit. Again, just make sure I've got nice, clean, everything ready to go. You can see some of them had to get some green stuff work on them. But that is all cured and set. And my biggest thing is I want to make sure that there's no dust and debris on them, so that as I am painting, I am not getting any little funkiness. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is start thinking about colors. So here's kind of where I'm at with these three figures. So this one here is obviously a magic user. casting a spell, levitating. The book is kind of very dynamically moving. We've got a wand in the hand. So this figure here makes me think this elf is generally indoors studying, reading, practicing magic. This one we did as a, I was going to do it as a witch, but ended up doing it as a druid instead. Now, because very, very clothed and everything, the most exposed areas are on the hands and the face. But it makes me think a little bit more kind of outdoors, but the way we built the character, this is a character who spends most of their time indoors in like a botanical garden with fungi and mushrooms and everything. So also more indoors, paler skin. This figure here, as a ranger, spends most of the time outside. So I'm thinking a lot more sun exposed. Even though it's an elf, I want to have more of a sun-tanned appearance to this figure. So I've got 2 indoor, 1 outdoor. And the way I want to tackle this, I could do it with tanned skin and then the tanned shadow, and then Caucasian or stark naked, or maybe even tawny. Maybe tawny and stark naked. So this is kind of the base coats that I'm thinking of. And then I just want to check and see my fair highlight still is even darker than stark naked. So this is probably what I would do. So I would use the brightest color, the lightest color, to bring in highlights to their skins. And then I would bring in darker tones for the shadows and mix them through. So that's kind of where I'm at. I may actually eliminate one of these and use the tawny for both of them, just because this one's so small. The variations aren't going to be as relevant for the figure. So that's my process. I am going to start, actually, I should have put these on the vortex, but I did not. So if you're just joining me or watching right now, my name is Joe. I am with Green Oaks Gaming. It's Green Oaks Arts and Gaming, but we just go by Green Oaks Gaming most of the time. And our Saturdays are all about studio time, so being in the studio and doing what I love to do, which is miniature painting. And like I said, I've got a backlog that's just massive. I've got 2 dragons that are prepped and started with a base coat that I need to be working on. I've got 2 dragons that I still need to base coat. One of them is getting some green stuff work right now. Actually 3 dragons, I apologize. I've got a zombie dragon, I've got a gold dragon, 2 gold dragons actually. One of them is a Chinese style dragon. The other is just this big, huge, massive dragon. I've got a lot of dragon-esque figures. So things like a young dragon on its horde. I've got a wolf dragon, a saber-toothed cat dragon, not to mention just a lot of various PC figures from our Wednesday show. I've got 2 owl bears to do. I've got a pixie. I've got a bust. I've got 2 zombie wolves. I've got a hippogriffin. And then all of these display figures to do. So a lot to get accomplished. So I'm hoping in the studio today we're able to do a whole lot. We've got a little bit of a blockage on our tawny flesh. Let's use our Reaper Pokey tool. Clean that off with some paper towel. Make sure we are able to pop that on there. And then tanned flesh. So that's my mid-tones that I'm going to be using. And because many of these figures are larger, I'm actually going to be using a very large brush. This is a number 5 around. And again, this is just to get this initial coat on here. This is the base coat. Then we'll be mixing in some shadow colors as well as highlights after a bit. But I just want to thin this down a little bit and then start applying. This is going to be very ugly to begin. Because I've thinned it down, we're going to have some gray showing through. This is not going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. This will take a couple of coats. And I actually, on that neck there, I'm seeing a little bit of gapping to that collar. We'll see if we can adjust that via paint application, but I may have to go back through and do just a little bit more green stuff in that area that we will see. And a little bit of the ear coming through the hair there. Of course, on these elves you really want to watch for things like the ears, because you can easily miss them if you aren't paying attention. Again, just a thin coat. This is going to be the base coat that will build all of our color palette on top of. I noticed this last week Squidmar Painting did a video release of testing various paints. It was part 1. I imagine they're going to do 4 parts to this video series, and it is kind of a battle royale, a March Madness almost of hobby paints. And I thought it was fascinating. If you get a chance, check out Squidmar's YouTube. The first video is painted there, and they are just going through the first bracket, testing various paints out and starting to eliminate for that first round. This next week they will be switching who used what paints and carrying on the video series. But I thought it was really interesting. There were some surprises for me in there because as they were doing these tests, the brands that they were using, so I've heard of almost all of them, but not all of them, but there were a couple of brands in there that I thought sounded pretty interesting. Their feedback was really, really relevant, I think, and good. So for me, I primarily, almost exclusively use Reaper Msp Paints, just for the simple fact that I love the product, love the company, and I get shipping to me extremely fast. So for me, I thought their feedback on Reaper was pretty good. I was actually surprised that Squidmar had not used Reaper paints in the past. So it was a bit of information that I thought was pretty interesting. But they even went through and used like apple barrel craft paints, and yeah, I thought the feedback and information that they provided on the paints they were doing was super informative. So I do recommend, if you get a bit, go to Squidmar Painting, I believe is the name of the channel on YouTube, and check it out if you're interested in that kind of stuff. They don't get super technical on, you know, the pigment ratios and things like that. It's not a super technical video. You don't have to be a molecular scientist to enjoy it, I don't think. And of course you get to see them paint some beautiful miniatures. What else? What else? What else in the hobby that I can talk about? Bones 6 Kickstarter is well underway. There is a lot of hype going on about it. They just added a couple of reveals, early reviews on things that will be coming up that I thought were pretty cool and interesting. If you're interested, check out reaperminiatures.com for Bones 6 Kickstarter. Of course, a lot of the figures that I've been using in my Wednesday character building show are Reaper miniatures from Bones 5 Kickstarter that I was lucky enough to be able to be a backer for. This figure here, this witch, is one of them. Beautiful sculpt, of course. Challenging sculpt, I'm positive. The amount of details in these figures are just kind of mind-numbing. I'm trying to decide, are those sleeves and gloves? I believe they are. So I'm going to change up a little bit here and make sure that we are doing sleeves, or short sleeves, and gloves. Pull some of this extra paint out. We don't want to lose detail. I guess that falconing one has a glove as well, so we got to make sure we just do the forearm aspect. And that's my first base coat, stupid simple. Now we're going to move to the Ranger. And again, just a real thin initial base coat. We just want to start getting paint onto the figure. If I did not water this down, one coat would probably give me a good solid base coat, but I want to make sure that I'm not leaving any brush strokes, especially using this larger brush. And I'm getting nice thin layers to be able to build upon. Because as I go through and do highlights and shadows, I want good smooth transitions. And it all starts with that base. So when I was a kid, I was a big fan of the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. I watched it religiously because, of course, I've always been interested in fantasy and sci-fi stuff. So when it came out and we would watch it, I was absolutely in love with the show. And my favorite character has always been Hank the Ranger. I never thought of him as the de facto leader or anything, but he was just always a well-grounded, well-done character. And I love the magic bow, his energy bow. And I liked that some of the story arcs with him, for like when they're in the skeletal tower and he's concerned about being the leader, I just really liked what they did with that character. So I've always been a Hank the Ranger fan, so I'm trying to think of I'm going to have to Google it, the female name for Hank, and that's what this figure I'm going to call, instead of Hank the Ranger, Henrietta. I don't know. But this is going to be my Hank. This is going to be a display piece just for me. And so I'm excited to utilize this one. Now in May, waiting on paint to dry. This is pretty dry. We could go through and start doing the second layer of the tawny. You can see how that paint is very, very thin. Lots of gray still showing through. So we want to make sure that we get good coverage with multiple layers. I would rather do multiple layers, multiple thin layers, and keep the detail rather than doing one heavy layer and risk losing any detail. Oh, hit that camera real hard. Sorry about that. I hope I did not give you any whiplash. And again, with this big number 5 brush, with this initial layer, we make short work of it. And then when we go through to start shading, we'll switch to a number 2 round. And you might be thinking, with such a backlog, why am I going so slow? Why would I do thin layers and spend time painting multiple layers? Because I still want them to come out fantastically done. Even for the Ranger, it's going to go on my shelf. I'm all about taking it nice and slow and doing the best job that I can. So I'm okay doing multiple layers on these figures. And I do want some of these areas to dry, so I'm leaving a little bit of gapping from where I'm painting. Really careful not having that on a handle. I just want to make sure that I'm careful with that wand. It's super, super tiny and delicate. And same with the witch, just multiple thin layers. that we do not disturb or hide or bury the details of the figure. Had a friend give me his review on the Batman. I have not seen the Batman yet. Debated, do I want to go see it in theaters or not? You know, movie theaters are getting so dang expensive. Because I'm a sucker for, I want to have you know, snacks. I want to have popcorn. I want a big tub of popcorn. I want a big drink. So it gets expensive. So do I want to go see it in theaters? And his review led me to believe I should probably just wait for it to come out. Should probably just wait. I'm kind of glad that they did not put the ear coming out on this side, but it's also kind of funky because the ear sticks out so far on this side. But there again, just looking for details. What's something that I am afraid I'm going to miss? The sculpt here, or these, excuse me, these sculpts rather, make me think of the Angelica Fair weather when we painted that. Of course, that's been months ago now. But a bust from the ReaperCon I really enjoyed. I've got 2 more of those busts actually to paint. I should have prepped one of those and done them at the same time. But then I'm also glad I did not. So flesh tones. Oh, pretty decent for that initial. And it's going to take multiple levels because I want this nice and thin. And then we'll start building up. What I may do actually is, let's see, what's another couple of minis that we've got here. And we can go ahead and put their flesh tones on just to get them started. This was a sorceress that we built, a goth sorceress from our Wednesday night stream. Same deal. I'm going to do this tawny flesh. Too thin for this miniature. Let's pull some of that water out. Leave just the pigment. Of course, these are just our Wednesday night character builds. I still have not decided what we're going to do with those. I haven't seen or heard a lot of interest. So initially my thought was, do we want to use them as some type of giveaway to help grow, you know, the followers and all of that, and then as we get, you know, a certain number of followers, use them as giveaways. But I don't know, there hasn't been a whole lot of like growth or anything, and I don't like making people wait forever for things like that. So I don't know, but I am going to go ahead and get some skin tones on some of these figures. I actually thought I had one more, but maybe not. This one here is a brawny dwarf that we built. A fighter. Heavy plate mail on him. And then this one was also one that we used for the Wednesday night stream. And we did a paladin. With this figure. Super inspiring figure, I thought. The that show was a lot of fun. Just to get them kind of moving. Just kind of moving along. Just looking. So I've got that big one. I would love to start popping some colors on that. I'm debating. So that's this one here. Necromancer. I'm just not ready yet. Just not ready quite yet. Want to do just a little more cleanup on that one. Then I've also got this Leonin. Again, I'm not quite ready for it because I want to really look at moving the colors from the face into the body. So I know we're going to use lots of tanned flesh tones, but I may also go with more like olive skin tones because I think they will go in really well with that tabaxi face, regardless of if we make it more lion-like or what. But we've still got some cleanup to do on this one. And then our knoll. Also, I thought about doing a lot more tanned fleshes that we can bring into the kind of pelt colors. And this one's pretty close. This one doesn't need any additional cleanup as far as removing any sprue marks or anything like that, but I still need to just brush it off really good and then wash it. That one has not yet been washed. Let's see, we do have a sprite figure here that is very different. It's almost it's very different because it's got like lots of wood in the armor and these mushroom bits and everything. Also needs to get washed off before I can apply any paints, but a lot of opportunity on ones like that. All right, let's just check and see here. Still a couple small areas that are a little damp, so I want to wait. And the recess area is still a little damp. And a little damp in the recess area. I want to wait and make sure that the paint is all dry because if you go to do, so the outer part on any wet points will be a little dry, but if you go to paint over that, it's going to peel right away from the wet under bit. So you'll have actually a space where you're pulling paint off of the miniature, and it definitely is apparent, so we want to just take our time, really go slow and balance. Maybe while we're waiting on that, here's something I can do quick and easy. I'm just going to grab Earth Brown, the box here, use a pre-done palette. I'm going to get my maybe I have a good dry brushing brush. I get my whole cup here so I can see really close. Oh shoot, there it is over there. We've got this big dry brushing brush. I'm going to pop some of this earth brown in here. And I've got this stand. Get a bit of paper towel. So this is a brush stand I got from ReaperCon 2021. And I'm just going to do some dry brushing. So I went ahead and just did a base coat of black. And I just did Nightmare Black as a base coat. Now I'm just going to do some dry brushing of this earth brown. To bring out the wood texture. Because it looks like planks on the side. That's going to get us a little bit of that black staying a lot more recessed. This one here is really just more for fun. I don't have the area that I've really been wanting to be able to use this properly on my desk. So for this one here, I've really just wanted to have it get painted and then eventually clear an area on my desk that I can use it. So just every little bit that I can do to work on it a little bit, just brings it that much closer to being done and usable. But a cool little brush stand. Those cutlass handles so I can start making them look like leather. I'll start variations on this of different browns and tans to make the wood look like wood. Probably do the railings in golds, maybe. But it's doing something so that the paint on the miniatures gets a chance to dry. So nothing fancy, again, just little bits of spending time painting. little bit of dry brushing there and moving right along. Now, of course, the challenge is cleaning out that brush. And getting a drink. All right, that should buy us time to look and see. Make sure we start with a moist brush. And back into our paints. And this should give us the coverage we need for this miniature. This should be the last layer we need of our base. Then we can start applying our shadows and highlights in that order. I believe we'll have some really good coverage. Of course, we'll wait and make sure everything is nice and dry before we decide that for sure, but I'm feeling pretty confident that this will be the last of the base tone that we'll need for this beautifully sculpted display figure. And depending on what you are doing Labor Day weekend, I am going to be at ReaperCon. Feel free to, if you are in the Denton, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denton area, check it out. While I have not yet put out what classes I'm going to be doing there, we'll be doing that here within the next few weeks, from my understanding. But even if you're just showing up for the paint and take, I do try to participate in at least one paint and take window so that I can just paint with everybody. Just sit down and talk about whatever and paint together. So if you are looking for something fun and interesting to do on that Labor Day weekend, I do recommend checking out ReaperCon. Once these base coats are done, then we'll really get into more interesting stuff as we start working on shading and highlighting. But this is an important aspect. These initial layers are so important, I can't stress it enough. This is your foundation. Everything else is built upon this process. So don't rush it. Take it nice and slow and steady. Lots of layers of thin paints are really, really more beneficial than less coats of thicker paint. I really urge you, if you're working on miniature painting, get two minis that are identical and do one with a heavier coat and one with a thinner coat as that base layer, and really watch and see the variance on the finished product, on all of the layers, on everything that you do. It is super interesting to see how that varies the outcome of your miniatures. We had a little bit of a cold snap here past few days. My gosh, I was not ready for it. I was not ready for it. I was just getting into really enjoying that warmer weather, and this cold snap happened. And I mean, it wasn't horrible by any means, but it was just more chilly than it had been. So my gosh, I was struggling a little bit because I just was so unprepared to, wear warmer clothes or anything like that. I was not ready for it. I definitely am a wimp that way. Once I get warm, I'd rather be warmer than colder. So I'd rather the temperature be hot and move into AC than be cold, because for me, when I get cold, it takes me forever to warm back up. I don't know why, but I have to it takes me ages to get warm again if I get too cold. I'll shiver, and I mean, just absolutely miserable. And it takes me a long time to warm back up. I'll get under comforters, and still I'll have to sit there for 2 hours before I warm back up. Yeah, definitely on the back of that neck, I'm going to have to come up with something because it's definitely going to be apparent. So I may, after the flesh tone is done, I may have to do a secondary collar, a very short collar within the collar. That'll help hide that and fill that up without detracting, and allow me to keep painting the flesh tones. So it does look like for that miniature anyhow, I'll have one more layer to do. Let's see how this one takes this third coat. Part of it may be the material as well. This one here again is a Bones 5 miniature. So I believe this is Bones Black. But definitely taking the paint really well. I think this one may be fine with just the 3 layers. Hope I did have the one Sorceress too. We're doing her skin tones in the same tawny color. I thought about while I was doing these, I knew these skin tones were going to take a while. So I really thought about, do I have my reds so that I can work on my dragons? But even though they're a little bit smaller, they're still too big to move around really well. When I'm working on the dragons, I really need to have the space. So I need to work on the dragons kind of by themselves, just to have the area to work on them. where these ones here are sized enough to where I can move them around and move them in and out of the screen really well. For the dragons, for instance, let me pull one of them in here, and it's pretty big. Got to juggle around all the stuff, and you can see it just doesn't even. Moving this in and out of screen with multiple miniatures is a challenge. I'm not going to be able to put it back where it was yet. Anyhow, yet. So I hope everybody's Saturday is going good. Let's check and see how our flesh tones are going. Oh yeah, that's looking really good. May do just a little bit more. I may do one more. Just that cheek area there is a little thin for me, and then parts of the chest are a little bit thin. So we'll probably do one more thin coat on our tanned flesh, and then start being able to highlight, which works well because I know this one's going to need at least one more coat. This one I think we're good to go. Of course it's still wet now, but I believe we're good to go. Let's check these fellows out here. Yeah, see, he could use one more just on his forehead, though there will be lots of highlights on that. So for PCs, I want the light that I'm painting, the faux light, to be directly above them. So that would get multiple layers and lighten up accordingly. But again, I want a good solid base. Our dwarf, the biggest part there is the nose, and that actually looks like it covered really well as well. So I think we're okay with the dwarf. But we'll probably hit our paladin once more as well. Again, just waiting on paint to dry. Waiting on paint to dry. I could pull out the clay and start sculpting the base for one of the dioramas where the samurai is going to go. But again, moving big pieces in and out is a little bit of a challenge. So I do want to look at the deepest recesses on this. I mean, there's definitely some fabric or something in there. I don't believe that's flesh. Super sunken. Well, no, you know what? That may be actually flesh. At first I thought this was a mask. I want to look at the fingers. The fingers I initially assumed would be gloves. Fabric, armor, fabric. So that face may actually be the face. So for that one there, I would probably do some ghoul, because I want this to be dead. I want this, I'm going to actually grab a little bit of paint here real fast just to play with something. So this is called Vampiric Skin. I believe I am going to do this figure with vampiric skin tones, and then may do like a bit of a, well, that's separated pretty hard. Obviously I did not do a vortex. I should have put it on the vortex. I'm going to suck some of that back up. Clean that bottle off. It's a good thing about droppers versus pots. So we'll spend a few minutes giving this a shake. That also is going to allow us to have the paint on the other miniatures dry out really well, and we'll base coat the skin tones on our samurai. I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention to that earlier. Now I do also want to look at the feet. Oh yeah, the feet as well are in sandals. So I could do the feet the face. Now I could do the hands. I could do the hands as well. Oh yeah, much better. Make sure those are mixed up really nice and well. Again, I'm going to use my larger brush just so I can get this started and this base coat applied, because just like the others, this will receive multiple coats that are nice and thin. And I'm not super worried about painting over some of the aspects of the sandals and such. You can see I've got this pretty thinned down, so it's not going to adhere super thick, but that's okay for me. Again, I would rather have multiple thin coats than one thick coat. Got some skateboard decks to paint as well. Maybe here in a bit I'll pull one of those on here as we're waiting for some paint to dry, because I've got to put on the graphics. Not put it on, but sketch it on before I start to paint. Now this is an interesting part because he's holding the sword. Do you do the hands first or the hilts? Generally I would do the hilts first because the hands rest on it. But because we're just doing base coat, I'm going to do the hands first. That way they have got their flesh tone started. And then we can go back through with some tighter brush strokes to do the cleanup bits. Oh, it's a little wobbly in there. I have to drop some poster tack in the base there, just to make sure it's holding on to the ghetto handle. This figure's almost got a Freddy Krueger face where it's got like scarring and holes and things like that, which we will address as we start working on some of the detail painting. And this is just popping on this base coat. I want to have a good base that we can build our colors off of. And same process. Same process. So now we're going to go back to Paladin. I said, we're going to do just a little bit more thin coat. Make sure it has coverage, is nice and opaque. Too much of that eye socket there. There we go. Sometimes you got to pull some of that paint back out. All right, his base tone is good. Now let's work on final level. Layer, whatever you want to call it, on our Ranger. Hands actually aren't that bad, but I'm going to go ahead and pop the same number of layers consistently on the miniature because I want those tones to be even from the hands to the face. By doing that, we're just making sure that the tonal color, the application of the pigment, is consistent. And that will finish out our base tone there. Now I think we should be able to finish out our tawny flesh on these other two. I'm running a little thin on the wet palette, so I'm going to add a little bit more. Thin it out a little bit. I just want to check and see here. Not too bad, but I am going to go ahead and just hit it once more, just for consistency. All right, moving on to our wizard. Under legs. Into the upper portions. I'm still seeing quite a bit of gray in there, so we'll probably have to do one more. Some of it could just be the color of our resin. This is a pretty dark gray, and because it's resin, the color is going to react a little bit different than it is on things like the Bones Black. And I'm not a chemical engineer or anything like that, but that's my guess, that's my story, and that's what I'm sticking to. I'm feeling really good about it so far. I think the figure overall is taking the paint very, very well. I am extremely excited to start getting paint on this figure. I've had it since September. So being able to get some paint on her is fantastic. What a good feeling. What a very good feeling. Let's pop this here so we can see it a little bit. So I am already, and we'll go over a little bit while we're waiting on paint to dry. We'll go over, oh, you know what, I forgot. Those little panels on the side. You gotta watch, make sure you're getting everything. Be aware, be aware, be aware. Okay, so now we'll go over little bits of coloring, Oh, hold on, I've got an alarm going off. Let's see what we got. Oh, I gotta take this call. I'm gonna mute my mic real quick. Hello, this is Joe. Hello. Okay, sorry about that. When family calls, always answer. Always answer. I don't care. Anyhow, we were going to talk a little bit about color. So, one of my personal challenges for 2022 is to push myself to have more vibrant, brighter colors. And so this is one of the ones that I'm really thinking of, how can I push myself to be extremely vibrant and colorful. So I'm thinking in the smoke, I want to have blues and purples, but not like super dark. I want this to be, I want the recesses to be pretty dark, but I want it to overall be extremely bright colored smoke. Now the book, I am going to do it, it's a super decorative book. But I am actually going to make it, the pages of course would be just an off-white, kind of a yellowed white, right? Because I want them to be old. But then I want to put glowing runes on the book. So some of that is going to lead into some OSL on the leg. And depending on the colors, I was thinking of doing green or purple, or I'm sorry, green or pink on those runes. So we'll have some greens or pinks, OSLs, moving into the thigh. For the book case itself, for the book cover, it's extremely rough. So I'm thinking about keeping that texture and making it actually look like wood, decorated wood. But I haven't decided that yet. Now for the underskirt part here, I'm really thinking about keeping it white. And I was thinking about doing like tights, Or tights, maybe that's not the right word. What's the right word I'm thinking of? Yeah, it is tights, I believe. But I decided, no, I'm going to go with just skin tones there. I just want to have very clean skin work on it. So I'm thinking about having these be like a white or an off-white, again a linen color, because generally the dress is going to be blocking that. But I'm not positive, I'm open. Don't hesitate, pop suggestions and send me ideas. And then I was thinking about blues and purples, or blues and pinks for the remainder of it. Aside from things like the dagger and the sash, but blues on the dress part and then up into the bodice, as well as pinks. And then the sash having that be a variant on pink. So we'll have blues and pinks, pinks or greens, purples and blues. So pretty vibrant colors, I think. Now the hair color, I'm going to have it be blonde because I wanted to use a very light flesh tone. And while, you know, in that argument of they spend a lot of time inside, so they're not getting tan, I mean, you really could do any hair color that you wanted to do. But I think it just goes into the reason that we're using a very light skin tone super well. It just reiterates that this is a fair-skinned person who spends all their time indoors, and that is why they are pretty pasty in color. So that's my thoughts on color, but I'd love to hear some other ideas too. Is there anything that strikes you about this figure for color tones? Is there anything that really jumps out and says it should be this color? And I'm kind of open. I want to push myself and challenge myself. So that's really where my head has been, is trying to think of what colors do I feel I can do really well and challenge myself with, really make this figure stand out on my display shelf. So we will see, we will see. And getting really good coverage here. Legs still a little bit thin. We'll probably do one more layer on the legs. And then this one panel here. Everything else looks really, really well covered. Then we can really start busting into shadows. Start popping in some shadows. Which also can be a little tricky. So we're actually going to do a little bit of shadow color with our tanned flesh. Oh, actually before we do the shadow color on tanned flesh, check on our Vampiric. We're going to do another coat on there. So this figure on the diorama is going to be facing off against another figure. So it's going to be I haven't thought of a name. I've played with a couple of different ideas for what I'm going to name the piece once it's done, but I haven't like finalized it yet. Oh, looks like I just got a delivery I'm going to have to run grab. My gosh. What a busy day. I did not expect such a busy Saturday. But this figure in the cold realm of death, I'll just leave it at that, is going to be facing off against a figure that I've already completed in the warm realm of spring and life. So the two figures will be kind of squaring away or squaring off in the display. And then the scenic elements of it will be twofold. One part of it is going to be wintry, cold, graveyardy. The other is going to be spring, tree in bloom, spring. So I am excited to start getting this together. I've only got until September to get this and one other diorama done. So it took me a while to pick out the miniatures that I was going to do for this. Well, I guess that's not true. One of the miniatures I had right away. The other miniature, this one here that I'm actually working on now, took me quite a while to decide which miniature I wanted to do. And then the other diorama, I've been debating the second one as well. So that one just got ordered, should be arriving Monday. So I've got a lot of work to do on that one as well. But both of these dioramas, I only have until September to get them done. So it's kind of daunting. All right, we're going to pop her there. I am going to somewhere, oh, I put it under a miniature, of course I did. We're going to pop this here. I'm going to go grab my mail, take just a quick break, and be right back. What time is it? Oh, we've already been going for an hour. Nice. We'll see how we're doing. We may do another hour. We will see. I plan on doing a lot of painting today, so we'll see. I'll be right back. All righty. Back to it. back to it. All right, in case you're just joining in, I'm Joe with Green Oaks Arts and Games. Today we're in the studio, we're doing a lot of painting and just working on some flesh tones today. That is our primary goal. Checking to make sure we've got nice dry paint on this beautifully sculpted figure. Lots of thin layers. We have had to build up to get good coverage. This is a resin figure. I do not remember the sculptor. As an artist, I always try to give credit where credit is due. Unfortunately, I am horrible with names. And I know it's not a great excuse, but it's the only excuse I have because it's the truth. I am not good with names. So I don't always remember who are the sculptors for the miniatures that I'm painting. Especially when there are so many fantastic sculptors out there. Just too many for me to really remember all of them. Just looking for the thinnest spots here so that we've got good coverage, even coverage. And looking pretty good. Now, I did say we were going to start working on some of the shadow tones on our tanned flesh. So I'm going to mix up a little bit here. Now, I use a very different brush when I'm mixing. Versus when I'm painting, because I don't want to damage my brush by mixing tones. Separating out those bristles and causing damage to it. So I use a different brush when I'm mixing. And I'm moving to the size 2. Making sure I've got nice thin paint. I want this nice and thin. Now I'm going to go in here on this miniature and pick all the areas where there is going to be shaded. Jesus Christ. Sorry, I apologize for my shaded areas. And I'm just going to be popping in some shadow tones. And these are not super dark. You'll see the variance though as we start laying in these shadows and then allowing them to dry. Now the secret here is picking out your deepest spots and not worrying too much about that base coat because we're going to be touching up the base coat should we need. So on this figure, where is the light that is going to be directly above, not hitting? What are the more recessed areas that the light is not going to get to? Those areas are the areas that we want to put our shadow color. And this is just an initial pass shadow color. So this is a blend of ebony flesh and tanned flesh. This is about a 60-30 and then 10% water mix. And you can see those almost like a, I call it camo face. Where we're laying in these tones. And some of them, in our deepest areas, we want to actually lay in even more, because we really want those shadows to be pretty tonally deep. So lay those shadows in nice and deep. And I know I'm more horrible at talking when I'm doing things like this. I apologize. It's often why I don't stream a whole lot while I'm doing detail work. Just because I'm concentrating so much. I gotta say, those who are doing streaming while they're painting, definitely kudos to them. Because it is extremely challenging. Be cognizant that someone could be watching and wanting to hear what you're thinking and going through and why you're doing it. And there are times where you're just like so focused on concentrating on what you're doing that you tend to forget. I do anyhow. And just go in and make sure we've got good deep shadows laid in where we want them. Whew. All right, let's, I'm actually going to do the paladin the same way. And of course this figure is very small. I should switch to my size 1 brush for this. For this fellow here. But I've got my size 2, so I'm okay. I think we'll be okay doing this with that size 2. And then for this figure, I'm going to do some stippling, a little bit of stippling as this shadow tone comes up around his head. I'm actually going to lay in a little bit above that brow as well. Alrighty. Now I'm going to use that same tone and make myself one that's even a little bit darker. Not a lot of this. This even darker tone, I'm going to pick the deepest areas for shadow and lay these in as well. That's going to push some of these back even further. Very little that I'm going to need on this one. And little bits of stippling to that. Just to keep it a little more organic. just like that. Now on these larger figures, of course, you want to go through and get you a good blend between your first shadow. So that's the deepest we're going to go. We're not going to go any deeper than that on those tones. We've added a lot of shadow. And again, it's got that, I call it the camouflage effect because it's lined very heavily. So what we want to do is use our initial shadow along with our mid-tone. We're going to have a variation between the two. So from that mid-tone into our shadow, we're going to start doing little bits of stippling between them. It's going to help us blend out those shadows. Start bringing our areas back up into highlight. Because we want these to be subtle, very subtle and organic. We don't want clean, solid lines on these. Just subtle. This is why it can take a while to do some of these miniatures, because the subtlety is what it's really all about. There are times I wonder if I spend too much time on some of my minis. But I have to say, with the results that I want to get, it takes more time. So I'm more willing to give it. And again, this just helps blend things together. I want to have things be as organic as possible as we're painting. So to achieve that, you've got to be willing to take the time and take the effort and learn and evaluate and look and see and really decide, are we there? What else can I do? Is there anything that needs more attention? And then this blended tone is what I'm going to use to start differentiating the finger bones in the hand. That'll start giving us more character into the hands. Get that brush nice and clean. Of course, as you're painting too, your paint is drying into your brush. So always make sure that you're cleaning out your brush. Where are we at today? Let's see here. We're at 1:41 Central Standard Time. I think we'll go, I'm actually going to get up to the mid-tone. I'm not going to give myself a timeline on this. I'm going to get back up to the mid-tone, and then we'll see where we're at. And we may take a break for a while. got to make sure you're getting up and moving a little bit. You don't want to cause your back any damages. So we will probably take a break for a little bit, get a little lunch, because I do have a little bit of hunger going, I'm not going to lie. Do a little bit of lunch and then we may come back to it. Part of it depends on what we got going on. There we go, into our blend tone. Now I'm not doing this on the 28 millimeter because the scale is so small. I need more contrast, so I'm not going to do as many blending layers. I'm not going to do it quite as much blending layers in there. But now we're back up to our mid-tone. I'm going to thin this out a little bit because I haven't thinned it since we first started working with it. It's gotten a little bit thicker, so I want to thin it out a little bit. And we're going to start doing the same thing with adding back in to our mid-tone. Again, just doing some stippling in here so that stays nice and organic, except on places like the ears where I'm going to need just nice clean lines. On the fingers here. And the hands. And with those mid shadows that we put in on the top of the hands, this will start giving us kind of more highlights to the definition sculpted on the hands. Where the bones not break, but stand out in the skin. And then some separation on the fingers. And then we've got the face left to do. And And then the midtones are back up, then it's about highlighting. So utilizing the midtone blends with the fair skin to start really driving in highlights. Where is the light hitting this figure? Picking out the details of the face, things like the nose, cheekbones, a bit of the upper lip, chin, just a hair on the jawline, there we go. When we started out with camo face, right, starting to add in those shadows, now we are getting into more smooth blends. All the way through. Now I want to real quick just check on this miniature here and see how we're looking for the blends. Actually not that bad. Because we didn't do much coverage on those shadowed colors into the midtones, there's only very little bits that we've got to do any type of touch-ups with. Again, just smooth, thin paints. Just want to make things nice and organic. Bring up those brow lines again. Bring in a little bit of that stippling into the head area. And just to keep it organic, we want to just keep it nice and organic. Make sure that we've got the nose and the cheekbones nice and highlighted, or mid-toned, and not highlighted, mid-toned. Just going to push those shadowed recesses we did under the eyes a little bit deeper. And then he does have a little bit of detail on an ear there. And then when we go to do the highlights, his flesh tone will be done. And real quick, just going to give her a once over again and see that a little bit thin on one of those lower legs. Other than that, not too shabby. So I'm going to do just a hair more. Our tawny flesh with our size 5 round, nice and thin. So to thin my paint on that, process-wise, what I do is I will make sure that my brush is nice and wet. I'll give it just like one big shake to push some of the water out of it, and then use that water that's in the brush as I sweep it through the paint on the wet palette. So that's, I've found with practice more than anything, that's about how much water I want to add to my paint on the palette. So that's my process. Everybody has their own different processes. I can't say what's going to be right for anybody or everybody, but that's my process. So I'm just going through and doing one last coat of thin paint on this figure. Just again, I want to make sure that it is covered nice and smooth, very opaque in color, so that I've got a good base to start shading. Process-wise is going to be exactly the same thing that you saw in the last one. For all of these figures, both this large as well as the smaller 28 mils. I'm going to use a touch of ebony flesh, so it's going to be much less than what we did on our tanned flesh. But I will use the ebony flesh to add in a shadow tone, and that will give us that variation into shadow, into our shadow color. So a lot of good consistency in how I maintain my shadow colors. So while I've got my big brush here, I'm just going to retouch this Vampiric Skin on this fellow. And I just want to make sure I've got a good, nice, even coat. I've got all of the flesh elements covered. Again, so we can build up good tonal variations with shadow. Now I won't use the ebony flesh on this. I actually have Vampiric flesh shadow. The reason is because the ebony flesh has a red texture to it. And for my undead, I don't want them to have red flesh tones. I want the skin to look like it is dead. So I don't want to introduce any reds or flesh tones in that aspect. So very purposeful in the colors that I use on my undead, because ultimately that is how you're going to make your miniatures look the part. Don't make your dead things look alive, and likewise don't make your alive things look dead. Think about the colors that you're using and how that's going to be perceived by the eye. And of course you can tell the variation from that flesh tone to the others. Interesting, interesting, interesting. And of course, as we go through and continue to shade and then highlight up, we'll be bringing even more variations to the skin throughout the bodies, and ultimately end up with these fantastically detailed, realistic looking or representative aspects of these figures. So I think that's it for me right now. I've got to take a break. I've got to do a little bit of running around and some choring. Who knows, I may be back doing some more painting a little bit later today, live on Twitch. If you're watching this on the VOD, then it won't be today. It'll be Saturday at noon is when I log on to work on painting. I'm going to just real quick check and see what we've got on the screen. Yeah, you can definitely see the variations on those shadow tones. Once we start working on those highlights, they're really going to stand out, especially with the other wizard. When we start laying in those shadows, it's going to look fantastic and much more in depth. Right now it looks fairly flat, but we will be working on that. I hope this was enjoyable. I hope it was relaxing, insightful, engaging, and I hope it is also very inspiring. So if you're thinking about working on anything miniature related, don't hesitate. I really urge you dive in. It is enjoyable, it is fun, it is relaxing, and above all else, it's a great avenue to let your creativeness just really pop out. So until next time, make sure you check out our schedule, see when we're streaming, and thank you. Have a fantastic weekend.